I think the underground network is an interesting case study option because it allows us to maybe reconsider our relationship to our structures, because the underground experiment and the underground project was itself such a liberated process in terms of its relationship to structure. I think of in 1976, the first supersonic jet was put into commercial air flight, the Concorde, which flew from Paris to New York in less than 3 hours. It was twice the speed of sound. It was an engineering marvel. A unique collaboration between both the French and the British governments. It was massively expensive, billions and billions of dollars. And even though it was one of a kind, and even though it was able to make that trip so quickly and could actually charge a premium for that service, it could only hold 100 people. And so almost immediately, so we're talking about 1976, almost immediately it became clear that it was a losing venture financially, and it was cost prohibitive to just even keep it running. It was going to cost just millions and millions of dollars a year from both of those governments to keep that plane in the air. And yet, even though that was clear almost immediately, the Concorde ran for another 27 years until finally being pulled out of circulation. That idea, what behavioral economists call the sunk cost bias, actually has become, if you look it up in a dictionary, you can actually find the Concorde fallacy. It's the idea that it's almost like epitomized by this one example, that the plane keeps flying, the collaboration keeps going, the structure, the processes keep being in play, just because we've already spent so much money on it, because we have sunk so much cost into it. There's this feeling that we have to somehow try to conserve that cost, and even though it is no longer, it isn't viable. It never was viable, actually. But we're committed. We're so committed. Now we've got to make it work. We've got to try to find a way to make it work. Unfortunately, that happens to all institution systems, especially when those systems did work for a while. But the church is always meant to be this dynamic living thing that has a relationship with God, that is like, intimately related to God. And so our sense of purpose as a church, or as churches, well, it changes, it evolves. Maybe not that sort of deeply orthodox biblical purpose to make disciples, but how and what strategies to use and how to employ, things like money or buildings or leadership training or any of our systems. Well, those things change as we have a different sense of purpose over time. But the problem is we might become aware or become prophetically in tune with God's dynamic sense of purpose in our time, but we're stuck with these structures that are from a different time. And those structures are they were designed to accomplish a different purpose in a different time. So the first thing we have to do, and I think the first, maybe encouraging aspect of the story of the underground is to liberate our structures. And I think that the way that you have to do that is you have to decide what it is we're actually trying to do and what it is that matters to us most. And one of the answer to that is not keep things going. It's not get lots of people in the seats on Sunday morning or anything that we think is somehow primary. But it's to actually ask the question, how do we either make disciples, or how do we transform our city, or how do we see the kingdom of God come in our time? Well, if you ask that question, then everything we do might look differently. And this is essentially what we did. We asked the question with no strings attached, no expectations, no burden of an inherited system, aside from the scriptures and a biblical orthodoxy. What do we want to do? So I think one of the first things we considered was this idea of the 80-20 rule. I think there was a 19th century Italian economist named Wilfred Pareto, and I think he first noticed that, I think he was looking at property ownership in Italy, and he noticed that about 20% of property owners owned about 80% of the properties, 80% of land. And then it got interesting, because then he looked at his pea pods. He was a gardener, so he had his little pea pods, and he noticed that 20% of his pea pods produced 80% of the peas. And that what has been called the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, is something that just seems to sort of pop up phenomenologically in human experience, where you have this kind of minority that is potent, creative, productive. And the problem that we saw early on is that the church was designed to serve the 80%. The church's structures, its systems, its services was all designed to serve the sort of nominal, or the least committed. And what that meant was the 20%, the most committed, then had to come alongside those centralized services to be the volunteer core to serve that least common denominator, that least committed, least discipled, least mature group of people who by definition weren't going to really do much, I guess you could say. And so that kind of centrifugal force, that pulling inward of everyone, really, the centralization of the works of the church, but also the most productive 20% working there in that space. We just thought that was having a negative effect on the 20%. So we started thinking, okay, what if the core work of the church was really to equip and work with the 20%? What if the centralized aspect of the church, the use of resources, the structure of leadership, the way we do governance or polity, the services we provide, the way we spend money, the way we collect money, all of that, what if it was actually meant to serve the sent, or serve the people that were ready and actually already had skin in the game and really deep held commitments to do mission out in the world? So instead of pulling those people off of that missionary frontier, pulling them into a centralized work to work just with nominal Christians, well, what if we said the whole centralized system would serve them so that they could be effective in the frontier of mission, the margin of mission? And so that was our way of kind of reverse engineering all of the systems of the church to serve that singular purpose. And I think that the first step we have to take in order to liberate our systems is to ask, what is that core purpose? What is that central purpose? And then to have the courage to push past our sunk cost bias and to say, some of these systems have to go, and some of them need to be completely changed, utterly changed. Ironically, though, when we did that, and as we've done that for the past 10 years, we've ended up creating some systems which look similar to the previous form. In some cases, just maybe at a distance, at first blush, very similar. Now, a closer look, they aren't. Something like our Sunday morning gathering, our Crucible gathering. From a distance, it might just look like a church service, but of course, our primary constituent or client, if you will, for that service is missionaries. So that the intensity of it is totally different. The expectation for how many people come. So if we have I don't know, thousands of people involved in the microchurches, we might only have a few hundred people come to something like that. It's an inversion, because it's intended to serve leaders, to replenish them somehow so they can go out and serve so many other people, to really be the church and operate the church in hundreds of spaces around the city during the week. But what we ended up coming up with was essentially the centralization of what we consider our church form is services to those people. And so we consider all the things that we've made to be like a platform for the advancement of those missionary people, their communities, their enterprise. So trying to answer the question, what do they need? How do we serve them? What do they need? Not what is our vision for consolidating all of them into one space to do stuff we think they need to do, but to actually say, what is it that God has already called you to do, you're already doing, and how do we, the centralized facet or aspect of the church, how do we come alongside you? So practically what that has looked like is 5 and now maybe 6 departments. The first being financial services. So all these guys need to raise money, they need help with accounting, they need to process their donations, in some cases they need payroll services, and so we just thought we need to provide that for them for free. And the facilities, that we have this 30,000 square feet, which is reservable. It's a co-op. It's like it belongs to everyone in the network. In that co-op space, we have co-working space. People could come and have a private office, or they can use it. They just share resources. They can collaborate on projects, share conference rooms, conferencing space. It's not like the church offices are just for the staff. It's like all of these missionaries now, this is the 20%, they're out pushing back the darkness and bringing the kingdom of God into incredibly diverse, creative places in the city. Coaching services. We have a department that just wants to give a coach. I want to say more than, maybe it's now around 80% of all of our microchurches are directly coached by one of our coaches. That's free. People need that. And not to say this is what you ought to be doing. We have some sort of master plan for you, but to actually come alongside them and do what we call inquiry-based coaching, which is to just say, what is it that you feel called to do, and how are you doing in getting there, and asking the right questions. Our media services, in some cases, people are working with the homeless, they're working in prison ministry, something like that. They don't know how to pull off a website, they don't know how to make a logo. God help us when they make a logo. It's a train wreck, it's a disaster. So they want help, they need help. So we created a media department, and we staff that department with talented people who want to serve the kingdom indirectly, and so they provide this for them. Training, probably our largest department has to do with training, offering a whole just portfolio, myriad of training options, from high-end kind of theology to skill training to practical ministry tools and things like that. For us, it's answering the initial question, liberating our systems to answer the initial question, how do we serve these 20%, so that they can be the potent force they're supposed to be in the world, not suck them into our centralized. And even something like money, we do take up money, we do collect money, we do ask people to pledge, we do raise money outside of our own circles, and then we're committed to 50% of all the money that we raise, we use for this infrastructure, and the other 50% we give away as grants, both locally to the microchurches which we're supporting, that 20%, but also globally, because there's a sort of justice component. Missionaries, when they give their money, want to see their money used well, effectively, especially because they're already making sacrifices in their own lives. And everything then is kind of like reconceived through this lens of serving the missionary. Even something like the way we use and give away money. If we were to take 95% of the money that they give us and just spend it on our own services or high salaries or something like that, and give very little or no money away to the poor or to the cause of Jesus in the world, or even back into investing into starting things like the work that they do, they would stop giving. It's a corrective because we're responding to their needs. And again, what's beautiful about the underground, it's not that it's perfect or not. It's not that it's a form or system that everyone should adopt, but it breaks open the mind to another way, another alternative, and it allows us to consider our own systems to say, we don't have to keep spending billions on the Concord. That doesn't really work. It isn't really viable, just because we've already invested so much. This, I think, is maybe the part of the underground story that is, at least for me, a gift or valuable to the rest of the church, to just maybe liberate us a little bit, that some of these things which feel like we just could never change that, we just could never stop doing that, to maybe have the courage and the imagination to say, actually maybe we could.